Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas, podcast dimensional.
Hola a todos, les envío un cordial saludo. Soy Heriberto Molina, Ética, y les doy la bienvenida a su otro episodio de su podcast dimensional de la Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas. Es un honor contar con su presencia en este espacio, donde nos seguimos nutriendo y aprendiendo sobre nuestra tradición, el sistema de Ifa, orisha y mucho más. Si deseas ponerte en contacto con los miembros de la fraternidad, puedes escribirnos a través del WhatsApp +1 786-328-8945 o enviarnos un correo electrónico a info@ifadelasaméricas.com. También puedes seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify por @Ifa de las Américas, donde encontrarás contenido valioso y actualizaciones sobre nuestros episodios. Además, te invito a que visites nuestra website ifadelasaméricas.com para que leas artículos muy interesantes escritos por miembros de nuestra fraternidad, como Rafael Molina Ifacemú y el mayor Leonel Gámez Osheniwu. Estos artículos son una excelente oportunidad para profundizar en el conocimiento de Ifa y expandir tus perspectivas sobre nuestra espiritualidad. Realmente te lo recomiendo. Gracias por acompañarnos. Estamos seguros de que este episodio será tan enriquecedor como los anteriores. Bienvenidos y bendiciones a todos los hermanos y hermanas oyentes que se conectan al podcast dimensional de la Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas. Hoy compartimos un episodio profundo, necesario: el Código de Conducta, habilidades esenciales en la consulta de Ifa. En este viaje hablaremos sobre la importancia de la ética, preparación espiritual, el comportamiento y la claridad mental del sacerdote o sacerdotisa al momento de consultar el oráculo. Ifa no es solo técnica, es sabiduría viva que se manifiesta a través del carácter y la conducta y la responsabilidad del agüo o Iyalorisa o el Babalorisa. Este episodio es para reflexionar, aprender y fortalecer nuestra práctica en alineación con los principios eternos de Ifa. Le damos la bienvenida a David Wilson, Baba Falokun Fatunmbi, a su podcast dimensional, Baba. Iborut Boye, Baba.
Muchas gracias, Parahoy. Tonight I'd like to speak about what I consider to be a very important topic, and that's the rules of conduct for a diviner, a person who does divination within the Ifa community. And I want to start that conversation by saying that these are not trivial matters. These are matters that are taken very seriously in traditional Yoruba culture, and there's consequences for violating the rules. It's not generally known in the diaspora, but every year on June 21st, all the male diviners in a particular village will sit on a mat in a line, and the elder mothers of the community will come by and feed their tray. If you look at an African Ifa tray and you flip it over, there's a little notch cut in the bottom of the tray. And that purpose of that notch is to hold an offering of yam powder that's made every year on the New Year's. June 21st is the Yoruba New Year's. So the women literally dance in a line past the awos, and then each of them will put a little yam powder from a hikara that they have on their head into the tray, and then they'll keep the progression going. There's singing that goes on while that's being done. But here's the important but. If any of the women have an issue with any of the diviners, if they refuse to feed the tray, the diviner can't divine until the next year. Now, that seldom is an issue out in the public. If a woman has, or even other men, if they have issue with anybody as a diviner, they'll talk about it in private, and if it is clear that a particular awo is not going to be allowed to divine for the up-and-coming year, they usually excuse them from that ritual. But it's really known that certain people either have permission to divine or don't. And if they don't, it involves making amends for serious problems that need to be fixed. O'Shea?
No basta saber lanzar el ópele o manipular el iquín. La conducta del sacerdote es un reflejo del respeto que se le tiene al oráculo y al consultante. Exploremos qué significa realmente tener un código de conducta al ejercer esta labor sagrada, babá. Le pregunto, ¿qué es el código de conducta en Ifa y por qué es fundamental a la hora de consultar, babá?
Well, the first thing to consider is that Ifa teaches through role modeling. You know, it's taboo for me to offer an opinion to somebody about their behavior unless they ask me. So the real foundation of all the teaching we do is role modeling good character. So you'll see in the rules, which I'm about to explain, that good character is at the foundation of each and every one of them. All right. I will give you an example. Ifa is fundamentally a communal spiritual discipline. I have never in Africa seen a single awo divine for anybody. It's always a group divination. When the diviners sit down to divine, there's one person who's like the chief of the divination. The women sit to his right, the men sit to his left. The reason the women sit to the right, because that's the male position. So women sitting in the male position is yin-yang balance. The men sit to the left. Men sitting in the female position is yin-yang balance. The youngest awo in the room is furthest away from the chief diviner. The oldest are closest to them. They start the interpretation of Odu. Actually, they start with the youngest person in the room usually recites a verse or two, and then they begin the interpretation. But it works from the youngest to the oldest, youngest woman, youngest man, next youngest woman, next youngest man. It flips back and forth until they get to the end. In most circumstances, if it's a well-trained group of people, by the time they get to the chief diviner, he won't have anything to say because everything's been said. But his job is to call on people to speak. His job is to determine if everything's been said, and his job or her job is also to finalize the marking of the above. So, but one thing that doesn't happen and never happens is you never have a man read for a woman without another woman elder present. That's not the way it works. If a woman comes for a divination, that diviner needs to have an Ifa or an Iyami in the room with him at all times. End of the story, end of discussion. This is not up for debate. I don't care who likes it or who doesn't like it. That's the rule. And so, the reason for that is two-sided. Sometimes men act inappropriately, and if there's a woman there to witness that, then they should put an end to it, hopefully. But also, a woman can falsely accuse a man if she has her own issues that she's working through. So having a neutral third party is important, but it's important that both men and women be represented as diviners. There's a rule in Ifa that says, takes a woman to tell a girl how to be a woman, takes a man to tell how to be a man, but a man cannot tell a girl how to be a woman. That should be obvious to anybody that's done any divination. So that the real issue is having enough people in the room that at least some of the people in the room have what Ifa calls the voice of authority. Ifa says any problem that you've fixed in your life becomes medicine for someone else. So if you've never struggled with addiction, for example, then you will call on the people in the room that have struggled with that and fixed it and figured out a way to get clean and sober, and they can share that experience as part of the content of the divination itself.
Baba Falokun, la sabiduría de Ifa fluye a través del sacerdote, pero ¿qué debe haber dentro de ese canal para que fluya con claridad? Hablemos de habilidades prácticas y espirituales, desde la conexión espiritual activa hasta el dominio emocional y la conexión con los orishas. Le pregunto, Baba, ¿qué habilidades son esenciales para ser un buen sacerdote al momento de consultar el oráculo?
Yes, okay. So here's the first and most important thing that a priest needs to be able to do. And that's to say either, the first thing that's important is to say, I don't know, if you don't know the answer to something. I have seen diviners be presented with a problem, who stop the divination, send somebody out into the community to bring the expert on that particular subject to the divination. For example, I was at an initiation, and the names are not picked arbitrarily. The names are coming out of the Odu itself, right? And so an Odu for Ita was thrown, and Baba did not remember the name that should be given for that Odu. So he sent somebody who was both a Muslim and an Awo. So he came into the room and he was wearing his Muslim robes, right? He took off his Muslim robes, he put on a buba, he answered Baba's question, told Baba the name from the Odu, and then he put his Muslim clothes back on and left the room. If there's actually a verse, and I can't remember, I want to say, I think it's Irite Ogunda, that says, do not pretend to know something you don't know. People have the mistaken notion that if you're a diviner, you're supposed to be all-knowing, you're supposed to have medicine for everything, you're supposed to have magical powers that fix everything. That's not true at all. That is not true at all. This is not a magic fortune-telling tradition. This is a problem-solving effort. You understand? So the notion that an Awo never makes a mistake, has to save face, has an answer to everything, has the power to fix everything, all that is total foolishness. And it does not exist as part of Yoruba culture at all. We've made priests in the diaspora into something they're not. I think heavily influenced by the idea of a priest in Catholicism being the intermediary between humans and God. No, right? You understand? People do not follow this is an important distinction. People do not follow the advice of an Awo because they think they're some kind of deified, elevated human beings. We all living and breathing, we're all dealing with our problems, we're all struggling to be a better person. But if you come to me for a divination and I say, if you do A and B, C will result, and you don't do A and B, and then you come back and complain that C isn't the result, then there's no basis for fixing the problem. If you follow the instructions, A and B will lead to C, and you do A and B and C doesn't happen, that's on me. Then I got to figure out what I did wrong. I need to look at the situation and say, oh, I didn't quite understand it fully. I didn't have the exact solution to the problem. Let's bring in more experts. Let's talk about this again. And it's important that you realize that the divination remains open until the problem's fixed. So the notion that Awos are some kind of supernatural, all-powerful beings that have the magic touch for everything simply is not true.
Pienso que más allá del conocimiento y el estudio de un Awo, de Odufa, hay una conexión que él ha explicado muchas veces con el título de Elá, pero que yo, sin conocer Elá por muchos años, he practicado y he sentido que cuando no recuerdo haber estudiado un Urdu, viene algo a mi mente y me hace hablar cosas y digo el problema y doy con la solución.
That is possession by Allah. That's the whole point. And possession from Allah, the most important element is good intention. The other important element is your commitment to approaching Ifa initiation as a commitment to service to the community. If you get initiated because you want people to think you're some kind of divine being, if you got initiated because you want to get rich, if you got initiated because you think it'll give you a powerful position in the community, I guarantee you will never ever connect to the spirit of Allah, because Allah does not respond to that frequency. The frequency of Allah is one of community service, and anybody who's engaged in community service from the heart, whether initiated or not, will be divinely inspired. And it's that divine inspiration that we're looking for. Another thing that will block a person's ability to connect spirit is this, and it's kind of a continuation of what I spoke of earlier. Sometimes as a diviner, you might be single and a woman might come for divination and you might be attracted to her and you might want to court her, and it may be a serious interest, and that's all fine. We're humans. That happens. But at that point, you can't do divination for that person. You have to say, I'm interested in courting you, and that precludes me from assuming the role of father or Baba, so I'm going to ask you to get divination from someone else. And having said that, there's two other aspects of that are true and misunderstood in the answer. The first is there is no Odu that says that you can fix a problem by having sex with a diviner. No Odu says that. If any diviner ever tells you that, you get out of their house as fast as you can, and depending on how aggressive they are, you need to seriously consider calling the police. That's a sexually predatory behavior, and it's got nothing at all to do with our faith or our tradition. The other thing that Ifa says is you do not answer the question, well, is so-and-so my soulmate? Jason's heard me say this many times: don't know, don't care, not going to ask. The question of who you want to be with as a partner is up to you. You make that decision. Once you make that decision, then you can come to me and ask the question, what do I need to do to make this relationship work? And I will answer that. But Ifa is not going to intervene in the question of whether or not you want to be with somebody. That's an issue of personal choice and personal freedom, really. And that's something that you have to figure out and work out on your own. Believe me, if you start telling people who they should be with, and those relationships don't work, you're going to be the first one they blame, and that's as it should be, because it's none of your business. And it's certainly not the job of the oracle to play matchmaker. We don't do that, you know. You can discuss maybe a little bit about the pros and cons of a particular relationship. You can really ask the question of what it's going to take to make the relationship work. And sometimes what it takes is so much, it's like, okay, well, forget that. But sometimes you get an indication that making it work will be very, very simple. And in that moment, it's worth seriously considering moving forward.
Bueno.
Well, that leads to another question, and that's the question of awo and polygamy. Truth is, certain orishas, certain awos who have certain orishas can be polygamous, and other orishas are not. Shango is definitely polygamous inclinations about the law monogamous for sure. Same with Ogun. But the issue is this. Some people in the diaspora believe that being polygamous is having as many girlfriends as you can find without your wife finding out. That is not the meaning of polygamy. Let me repeat that. That is not the meaning of polygamy. In traditional Yoruba culture, the first wife gets to decide whether or not her husband can have more than one wife. She gets to decide who that wife can be. She gets to decide what work each of the wives has, and she also disseminates the budget for the wives to have money to work with to do what they need to do to take care of their business. So there's very little that the man has in terms of responsibility for creating a polygamous relationship, maintaining it, or sustaining it, really. I mean, sometimes one place where an awol does intervene if there's conflict between the wives, an awol has a responsibility to resolve that. But, sometimes that's best resolved by elder mothers who are not in the relationship. So, that's a difficult kind of social structure to be a part of. But, the reason polygamy developed in Africa is partly a strong desire to have children. There's no woman who wants a child in traditional Yoruba culture who can't arrange some kind of relationship as a part of some kind of polygamous structure. I mean, it's almost unheard of for a woman who wants to have children and be a part of a family not to be able to accommodate that. But also there's more women than men at one time historically for various reasons. And the way the culture is set up, men do the farming, women process the food. But the processing of food is related to the farm that's tended to by your husband. So the men leave the house and they go to the farm. Farming in traditional Yoruba culture is usually going to the farm 3 mornings a week where you pull weeds. The rain takes care of the rest of it. It's not a real complicated process. But 4 times a year there's a harvest where men bring all the food into the village, and the women collectively process the food. For example, they'll husk corn, they'll peel palm figs, and so on, and then they'll distribute that equally, because most of the farms are communal farms, and each of the egg bays usually has their own farm or way of making money. So there's really extremely practical reasons to make all this work. You realize that 1 out of 4 Africans lives in Nigeria. It's the most densely populated area in the entire continent. And yet they figured out how to survive well in a challenging environment. It's because almost everything within the culture is based on practical considerations and efficiency.
A veces el oráculo revela situaciones muy personales, Baba. Dolorosas, complejas. ¿Cómo mantener la sensibilidad, la ética y sobre todo la orientación correcta en momentos de alto impacto emocional para el consultante? La pregunta que le hago, Baba, ¿cómo debe manejar el sacerdote situaciones delicadas durante una consulta?
Yeah, I don't think that there's an easy or all-encompassing answer to that, but the first step in any effective divination is empathy. In other words, for me, after if you've been doing it for a while, you can tell emotionally where a client's at as soon as they sit down on the mat. If I have any doubt about where the client is emotionally, I will ask them if I can touch their foot. Once I've touched a person's foot, I know exactly what they're feeling, and I know exactly why they're feeling it. That's the nature of empathy. We just wired as humans that we can do that if we know we can do it, if we trust it, if we allow that to come forward. Now, having said that, a lot of people come with practical problems, and the solution is just kind of a yes-no answer. Should I go to school? Should I quit my job? Should I move? Those are all pretty straightforward questions, usually based on practical considerations and usually without a lot of real strong emotional charge to it, all right? So where divination becomes emotionally charged is when the client is the victim of some kind of abuse. If it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, any form of abuse that causes trauma needs to be released in the context of some structure of healing. All right. So here's an important point. People think they can come for one divination, the oracle will provide a solution, and then the problem's fixed and doesn't come up anymore. You need to hear me real clearly. That is absolutely not true at all. Some problems take years to fix, especially problems related to childhood sexual abuse. I've never seen that healed in less than 2 years. So there's certain symptoms of childhood sexual abuse. You learn to recognize them over time. But the point is, once you've identified a client as struggling with sexual abuse, you need to make sure that there's an elder present who specializes in that kind of healing. If you're a man, you want an elder mother present who takes responsibility for working the person through that issue. All right. And so what you do is you get an Odu that guides the overall arc of the healing process, and then you bring the person back every 2 or 3 months, and you don't do divination again. You just mark the original Odu, and then you take the Opeli to get commentary on progress that's being made. So here's the issue with that kind of healing process. Usually as children, if we suffer any kind of abuse, we're wired as humans so that we go out of our body and we don't really fully absorb the trauma. So the trauma is stuck in our body and is unexpressed, and it causes all kinds of emotional and psychological problems. The Yoruba word for chakra is Iwaju. So we have chakras or power centers throughout our body. And if a child goes out of their body, depending on which orisha they're connected to, their real life experience is going to be stuck in that chakra. So as they come to you from healing, the ashe from the chanting of the Odu, the ashe from the chanting of the orisha that's close to that person is going to, what I call, press against the repression or the experience that needs to come out to be released. And here's why that's important. Let's say a person was molested by a man in a yellow shirt, all right? And they don't fully remember that experience. Every time they see a yellow shirt, they're going to go into trauma. They're going to be upset, and they're going to be resisting dealing with memories, and they're going to get paranoid and have all kinds of emotional reactions that are going to make no sense. So it's important that those memories come to the surface once, that they're fully understood and then cleaned away with various methods. Now, there's a serious problem in our communities that's just horrible, shameful, and painful all at once. Frequently, if a person comes with childhood abuse issues, and the diviner doesn't recognize that, doesn't know what that means, doesn't know how to heal that, then the emotional trauma is going to be confused with spirit. And it's not the same thing at all. The worst thing you can do to someone who's had a traumatic experience is to confuse the regression with a possession. A regression is when the person goes back in time to relive the experience, and when a person is in a regression, they really think they're in that time of their life. And if you say that that experience is somehow elevated and deified, then the person's going to constantly revisit the trauma thinking that's a good thing. And that's the most crazy making thing you can do to a person. Anybody that's stuck in that cycle and has a community that supports that level of dysfunction, I guarantee he's going to get more and more disturbed, crazy, upset, irrational, and harder to heal. It's just a horrible thing to do to a person. And I've seen it many, many times, and it's not acceptable. If we can't tell the difference between a regression and a possession, we have no business doing divination at all, ever. That needs to be a primary part of the training and a primary understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish, especially in the United States, where the incidence of sexual abuse among children is at least at 80%. So the chance, it's more likely you're going to get a client with problems who's had that experience than not. You understand? And when you have a person who's resisting calling up and cleaning away painful memories, that's going to cause addiction, it's going to cause overeating, it's going to cause unhealthy relationships, it's going to cause paranoia, it's going to cause the person to be accident prone, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. And if you don't accurately identify the source of the problem, you'll never, ever fix it. A lot of times people come with those symptoms and they're told that they are having those problems because the Orishas are mad at them. That is absolute and total nonsense. The Orishas are never mad at anybody. The thought that you can blame a problem on an angry spirit is like saying the devil made me do it. That may work in some forms of Christianity, but it does not work in Ifa. It is not what we believe, and it is a sure road to failure in terms of healing. It's why people come and they get healings and it doesn't work because the diviner didn't identify the problem correctly. Then there's hurt feelings, and people leave, and then they want to get another diviner, go to a different family, and then there's all kinds of, and then the diviner accuses them of being disrespectful, whatever the hell that means, and the cycle goes on and on and on and on without anything being fixed. And we need to begin to take a serious look at those issues and take a serious look at the appropriate strategies for fixing them. Ashe.
Baba Falokun,
Sí.
no toda consulta se maneja con integridad y eso puede tener consecuencias graves. Exploremos ejemplos comunes de malas prácticas y lo que Ifa dice sobre ellas, tanto a nivel espiritual como comunitario. ¿Cuáles son, Baba, algunos ejemplos de conducta inapropiada en una consulta y sus consecuencias espirituales y sociales según su punto de vista?
Okay, so there's three rules related to that. The first is, any community that engages in divination has an absolute taboo against gossip. Not sort of a taboo, not a sometimes taboo, but an absolute taboo against gossip. Now, the truth is, people that are running scams use gossip to pretend like they're psychic. So the gossip is going on all the time, all over, everywhere. And people are, oh, how'd you know that? How'd you know this? How'd you know that? No. You know, it's, there is absolutely no reason to tell anybody about the personal healing of somebody that's come to you for divination. The only reason to talk about it is because you're asking that person to help with the healing process. And, any kind of healing mechanism is regulated by law. It's actually against the law to gossip about somebody's emotional problems. There are HIPAA rules that make that illegal. So we're either doing spiritual work or we're pretending. But the first rule is no gossip. Person needs to be able to feel safe sharing whatever they went through and knowing that that will not be the basis of ridicule, gossip, denigration, or judgment. You understand? And no matter what a person's been through, it's absolutely taboo for an awo to make a judgment about that. Especially around child abuse. Children sometimes get treated poorly by adults, and that's never their fault. So to use those experiences as the basis of judgment and criticism is just not what we do as priests. I've spoken openly of the fact that I was molested by my uncle. It was a traumatic experience. I was very young. When I encounter people that have experienced some kind of abuse, I usually share my experience so the person will know I'm empathetic. And I can't tell you how many times people who were initiated told me, oh, you can't tell people about your experience. That's not good. They won't trust you anymore. They'll think that there's something wrong with you or so this is awful. No. It's called being honest. It's called being human. It's called having the voice of authority. It's called sharing what you or me did to deal with those issues. And to me, there's no other way to fix a problem. I've never, let me give you maybe a clearer example. I've never had a problem with alcoholism. If somebody comes to me with an alcohol addiction, I send them to AA. It's ridiculous for me to try and heal them. The whole premise of AA is people who have fixed the problem are helping those who haven't. And that's true for everything we do in terms of emotional healing within the context of Ifa. So there should be no reason to gossip ever. And no matter what a person's been through, there's no reason for judgment. What judgment frequently comes to play is when people will make judgment about sexual preference or make assumptions about ethnic background or make judgments about a person struggling with addiction or criminal behavior. All those things reflect a need to self-medicate based on unresolved conflict. Our job is to resolve that conflict, not to make judgments. So, to me, those rules are strict, and they're strict for a reason. I don't know. We could give examples, but there's not really any need for that. We never gossip. We never make judgment. So if you follow those two rules, you're not going to have any problems. Make sense, Jason?
Yo quisiera que me hablaras porque las reglas las conocemos. Hay reglas que conocemos, pero ¿cuáles serían las consecuencias de violar esas reglas a nivel social? ¿Qué podría suceder? ¿Qué me puedes hablar al respecto?
Ifa is a spiritual discipline based on building community, not being a sole practitioner. In other words, part of what we're trying to do is build community. And the reason we want to build community is the most effective medicine is collective prayer by a group of people that have the same intention and can hold unconditional love. All right. So once you make a judgment, once you're critical of people, once you gossip, you break the bond of trust. Once the bond of trust is broken, that's the hardest thing there is to fix in human interactions. I would argue that it's almost impossible to fix. But That's why we have in our community so many people come and go, so many people badmouth their elders, so many people looking for some comfort when not being able to find it. It's because we're not addressing the issue of how do you create healthy, sustainable family that engages in the healing art of unconditional love. And it's particularly difficult is because the few who control the many are trying to program us to be at each other's throats so that we never build community, because community is the only real threat to their power over the world and their ability to hoard resources based on their greed. So, we can let the social conditioning get to us. We can be vulnerable to the popular ideas of how to denigrate, and most communities are based on scenarios from reality TV rather than any real deep understanding of the role of unconditional love in building family. Ashe.
Baba Falokun, Ifa no es para vanagloria ni manipulación. Cerramos con una reflexión en este episodio sobre los valores que deben sostener a la UO y al Orisha, al Baba Orisha, como servidores de una tradición que es medicina, verdad y evolución. Baba, ¿qué papel juega la humildad, la discreción y el servicio en el ejercicio del sacerdocio?
That's the foundation of everything. Let me put it to you simply. And a bow is not a sacrifice, it's an offering. Every initiation is an offering, and every offering is an initiation. And a bow from a reading is a small initiation, and a bow from an initiation is a big offering for dealing with problems, let's say, all right? So here's the key to understand. When I initiate you, I'm not giving you something that you don't have. I'm unlocking something that God gave you. Right? And so the way I unlock the spirit of an Orisha in you is I go into possession with that Orisha first and then get close enough to you so you feel the ashe of that spirit. Possession, elevation, and offering is contagious and it's collective. So when I'm doing an abo for a client that has a problem, the first thing I need to do is own the problem, be the problem, identify with the problem, let the client know I'm feeling the problem with them and feel it deeply. And then I need to follow the guidance of the Odu to move from that place of pain and suffering into liberation and enlightenment. And as the owl makes that journey from that point of connection with the client, they take the client with them and they lead that to a place of resolution. You should always leave a consultation feeling better than when you came. If you don't leave feeling better than when you came, it's an indication that perhaps the diviner you've been to still has some work to do in their own training. But it's our job to literally make people feel better. But we can't do that superficially. It has to be make them feel better from that moment of profound and real connection with the real problems going on in that person's life. And that's not easy, and it's exhausting, and it's disappointing. Few people appreciate the effort. People want to criticize you rather than do the work to get the problem solved. It's a thankless job in many ways, you know. But I think coming together to pray in a state of unconditional love is the most noble thing that humans can do for each other. And there's nothing else that has that same level of meaning than the ability to fix what's broken. Ire Ashe To.
Gracias, Baba.
Gracias. You're a good man. I appreciate these sessions.
Baba Falokun.
Yes.
Muchas gracias, que su bendición y su enseñanza sigan con nosotros siempre, por favor. Y a ustedes, amigos, gracias por acompañarnos en este episodio del podcast dimensional. Recuerden, la conducta es la voz silenciosa del espíritu. Ifa nos recuerda que el saber sin carácter es humo, pero el saber con integridad es luz de guía. Hasta la próxima entrega. Adboru Adboye.
Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas, podcast dimensional. La Fraternidad Ifa de las Américas es una hermandad de babalawos a tu servicio. Si deseas realizar una adivinación o cualquier tipo de consulta, puedes contactarnos por el teléfono +1 786 328 8945 o por correo electrónico a info@lafraternidadifa.com.